Hey folks, we had feedback from a couple of people that they wanted more detail and instruction on how platform.openai.com works. And apologies to anyone that felt lost during that section during last class. We were responding to feedback from the previous cohort that we'd spent too long on that section and that people needed less of it. So we wanted to square the circle here by providing you with a video walkthrough here that's a bit slower and explains in more detail what the different components of platform.openai.com are, if you want to review this on your own time. It's not necessary, but will be useful for your own work in the remainder of the course if you want. So let's dive in. So this is a different front end than chat.openai.com. Chat.openai.com gives you ChatGPT. Platform.openai.com connects you to an older interface called the Playground that will give you a better sense of how to use the models in an app through the API. And allow you to prototype things that you can use directly in an app with the API, and also just gives you a lot more options in terms of models. So when you start out, when you go to platform.openai.com, you'll be instructed to log in, and then you'll want to come and do that. Use my password protector. Great. Verify that I'm a human. Okay, looks like I'm a human. At least for today. Once you're in, you'll see something like this. So let's take a second and look at what we have here. We have some different options down here on different tasks that we can do. We have a tutorial. But we're really only going to focus on two things here. One is this button up here in the top left called the Playground. And then also we notice that we have our account over here. And our account is going to be important for adding in some things like a card for billing, and also getting our API key, which we need our API key in order to build applications with the OpenAI API. So let's go to the Playground. And when we go into the Playground, we see that we have a few things here. We're in this mode called chat over here, and we have a model. We have a bunch of different parameters down here. We have something called user, and then this add message, and then system. So let's talk about what these things are. The fact that we're in chat mode means that we are accessing models that are chat enabled, that are built for conversation. So ChatGPT is a chat model. And if we go to our model options, you'll see that you have your 3.5 turbo. So GPT 3.5 turbo is the equivalent of free ChatGPT. This is normal ChatGPT is 3.5 turbo. GPT-4 is the upgraded version that you get with the $20 a month. And then you see this one in the middle, GPT 3.5 Turbo 16K, which is basically a chat GPT that you can talk to for longer, but it's a little bit more experimental. And you see that there's all these other little things down here. These aren't important for us for now. These are just other slight variations on the model that provide slightly different inputs and outputs. So how would we use this? How is this different from ChatGPT? So you see we have this thing called the system message over on the left. This is where we put things that we want the model to know and to follow throughout any statement or prompt that we're making. On the ChatGPT front end, this is known as something called custom instructions. And so I can come in here and say, write your answers only in Chinese. And say, hello, how are you? Submit. And it writes the answers in Chinese. So yeah, like I said, this is the same as custom instructions that you'll see in the Chat GPT front end. I don't actually want my answers to be in Chinese, so I'm gonna do that. And this is a little bit different from ChatGPT. You can remove these. And you'll see that there's multiple roles. There's this role of user and this role of assistant. So um, the um, the user is anything that you're putting in, and the assistant is anything that the bot is putting in. The difference being that you can actually put in mimicked assistant answers. And so this is something that you can do for few shot learning, few shot prompting, like we showed in the second class. So let me just take all these out for now, clear this so that we're back to where we started. So what are all these different things over on the side? We have our model. That's where we can select our model. And then we have this thing called temperature. So what is temperature? Temperature controls randomness. So if we up the temperature really, really high, it makes the model more creative. It makes it more likely to say strange things and kind of go off topic or go off the rails. If we put temperature very low, it makes the model almost deterministic and very repetitive, and very rote, and you might say a little bit boring. So you want different temperatures for different tasks. If you're doing computer coding, then you want the temperature to be very low because you don't want much creativity from the model, and you want to make sure that it is responding in a way that's very structured. Um, if you're doing poetry or creative writing, you might want the temperature very high so that it is more likely to produce things that are not useful to you, but it's also more likely to create things that are surprising or delightful or weird. Um, we then have maximum length here. So maximum length is the amount of tokens that it will produce before stopping. And so let me show you how this works. So I put the maximum length extremely low, and I say, write me a poem about cats. And then I hit submit down here. You notice it just cuts off in the middle of the poem. So the reason why it does that is because I put this maximum length to 43. So at 43 tokens, and a token is about 4 characters. It's not quite a word, so it's about 4 characters. It's going to cut off at 43 tokens, no matter what it's doing. I can, however, continue this poem. I just hit the submit button again, and it'll continue right where it left off for another 43 characters. There's not really a disadvantage to putting the maximum length too high, although it will tell you if you exceed the amount that's possible. So if it's very high to 4,096, then I try and hit submit again. We'll say, oh, well, the maximum length is 4,097 tokens, and you've already put in some, so it's not possible to produce this length. So it'll ask me to put it there. Stop sequences are a way of kind of indicating the end of a document within a prompt. This relates to few shot learning and providing examples. It's a way of controlling the type of responses, and probably is not very important for most prompts, in my opinion, because there's other ways to kind of manage that. But if you are interested, then go ahead and play with it. But just as an example, like you could put in something like this, that four hashes is the end of a document. And then so even if you're like within a prompt, Um, and you have some examples there. Uh, if you put this 4 hashes, it's going to indicate to the model that this is like the end of one document, beginning of a new document. So feel free to play with that if you want, see how it affects your outputs. Top P is a little bit like randomness. Um, there's you get similar behaviors. Um, I basically suggest always keeping top P at 1. What it controls the amount of options that the model will choose from when it's choosing the next word. So you get like it's a little bit like a weaker version of temperature in terms of its effects. And with all of these, I'm trying to provide you with like a qualitative, qualitative description of how it affects the model outputs and the text, even though what these really are mathematical adjustments, which is why I'm being a little bit vague. It's a little and hedging a little bit because the way that you experience it might be a little bit different than how I'm describing. But in similar to temperature, you can think of this as another toggle for randomness. The frequency penalty prevents the model from repeating words or phrases verbatim. So if you are doing something like, again, computer coding, you want frequency penalty to be very low because there's lots of repetition in computer code. Likewise, if you're doing something like legal documentation, you want frequency penalty to be very low because you want it to be able to repeat words and phrases verbatim very easily. If you're doing something that's more creative, like blog writing or essay writing, where you want to force the model to use more diverse language, to vary its vocabulary more frequently, you would raise the frequency penalty. One thing about frequency penalty and presence penalty, which I'll explain in a second, is that they are surprisingly sensitive. The difference between a frequency penalty of 0.17 and 0.19 is surprisingly large. They're sensitive parameters. All of this is less true with the chat models than with the base models, but it is still the case in my experience. With frequency penalty and presence penalty, I rarely find situations in which I need them to be above 0.25 or 0.3. And I find that above that level, it starts to make the outputs quite weird and undesirable for most tasks. Presence penalty basically increases the model's likelihood of changing the subject. So if you are in a situation in which you are creating lots of short types of documents, like lots of short poems or lots of short statements, and you want them to be different and varied from each other significantly, you might change the presence penalty. Or if you are you have a use case where it's meant to behave kind of like a person. The bot is supposed to behave like a person and is supposed to behave conversationally. You might want a high presence penalty because during conversations, topics often change divergently. The person you're talking to doesn't stay laser focused on exactly the topic that you're describing. So this doesn't look at the words and phrases that are verbatim repeated. It looks at the entire text as a whole and makes it more likely to change topics or move on to something that's not as well represented in the text as a whole. Okay, a few more things before we jump over into the other screen. The history here works a little bit differently than in ChatGPT. And I actually have not used this frequently, but it does keep your data for 30 days. So if you're using something in the playground, it will hold it for 30 days. This is the current terms and conditions from OpenAI, is that they will keep your data for 30 days and then throw it out. And they say that it's for debugging purposes. and they will not use the data for training purposes. If you're using ChatGPT, they're going to keep it indefinitely, and they will use it for future training purposes, so long as you have your history turned off. You can, if you have the paid version, you are able to turn this off, but you will lose your history. So that's the trade-off there. But you're able to reverse backwards here to previous states for 30 days and move backward in time, so to speak. And this saves every time you hit the submit button. And this allows you to revert to a preview. If you want it to save for more than 30 days, then you need to come up here to your save button up here, which creates a preset, which means that you can come back to it anytime. So let's say I want to make a preset with this brilliant, amazingly crafted prompt that I've made for poem generation. You can come here and save and call it poem generator and makes poems. And I can optionally make it shareable with other people. Click save, and it creates this static link for it that other people can check out. And then so this is going to be there for more than 30 days. I can go back to this anytime. So if I want to come in and then do make this part of an app, you can come in here and it'll give you an embedding into the API for different coding languages. This isn't important for now, but this will be important in week 2 as we're developing our simple AI app. We'll come back to this. Okay, great. So we've covered the chat interface here. We talked about what the system message is. We talked about the user versus assistant roles. We played around a little bit with how this works differently. We showed you where the history button is, that it will hold for 30 days, but not longer. And we talked about choosing a model. We talked about temperature, maximum length, stop sequences, top P, frequency penalty, and precedence penalty. This is what you will use to, at least this is the base tool for figuring out how to use stable prompts that you can then put into an app to filter, to surface a capability for people. There's also other interfaces here though. So if we go to the complete section, so we're out of chat and we're now in complete. So this is basically a wide open space. We don't have our user and assistant roles broken out here. We see that we have mostly the same parameters here. And we have some other parameters that aren't in the chat section. The main difference here is the types of models. The models in here are not designed for conversation. They're designed for task completion. What's the difference? If I put in, let's go to text DaVinci 003. I put in write me a poem about cats. You'll see it starts to write the poem in the same way. However, it doesn't. It's less conversational than the other one. So if I come in here and say, how can I put this? They are less likely to embellish. So if we come back over into chat, the chat models, they will often provide some kind of additional text in addition to completing the task. So that wasn't something that they did with our prompt here. They just wrote us the poem. But if you ask it certain kinds of things, it'll say, hey, well, you know, I'm not a person, I'm a language model. So I experience things differently than humans, but the complete models are less likely to do that. Also, the complete models are just older. They're usually less performant. The one exception to that being the GPT 3.5 Turbo Instruct models. In class, we came over to here and we tried out something called a base model. So if you come into this model and you choose this one that says Da Vinci with nothing after it, you get a base model. And so this is a base model. This is the descendant of all the other models that we use today, like ChatGPT. And every model starts its life as a base model. ChatGPT, GPT-4, when they start their life, they're a base model. Base models do not follow instructions. They don't, if I come here and I say, write a poem about cats, it might write me a poem about cats, but it's probably going to generate some weird stuff. So write a poem about cats, it is doing more of autocompletes. It's not following my instructions. It's trying to complete what I started. And it's guessing that what I'm doing is some kind of child, looks like school activities or something. And so the way that you structure prompts for this is much different. One key for base models, a key structure, kind of structuring is few shot. So this is like something we did in class 2. We have 3 poems by Pablo Neruda, and then so we can come in and take the 3 real poems by Pablo Neruda, and we can come and have it write a poem that Pablo Neruda never actually wrote. So it's possible to work with base models. Like I said, in practicality, day to day, even when you're building apps, very rarely do you actually deal with base models. Very rarely are you actually going to want to prompt a base model. I personally like doing computational poetry, doing tech-based art, doing creative writing. And so sometimes I come to base models like Da Vinci or like Llama 2 for more semantic diversity, more different kinds of text that are weirder or at the edges, because they tend to be able to produce more strange kinds of text, more things with more surprising results than the fine-tuned models. But practically speaking, you're rarely going to use this. The reason why we show it to you in the class is because when you're using, it helps, using the base models can help you understand why prompts function the way that they do in the fine-tuned models. Also, the fine-tuned models like ChatGPT or GPT-4 are, at the end of the day, still performing the same basic function of trying to guess what comes next based on what you started. And using the base models gives you a deep intuition about how that feels and what we mean when we say that. Okay, so that's the complete and the chat function. Just ignore edit for now. The many of the complete models, as particularly Da Vinci, are going to go away in the next couple of months. OpenAI is going to remove support for them, and so don't come to rely on this. But there's lots of great new open source models like Falcon 180B or Falcon 40B, Llama 2, that if you really want to play with the base model, those are there for you in the open source arena. Last thing I want to go to that we'll use might be helpful is sometimes if you come in here and you've just formed an account, you'll get some message that says you've exceeded your quota. And what that means is that you need to enter a credit card. So you can do that by coming to manage account. And when you come into manage account, you're going to see this option for billing. And this is where you can enter different kinds of methods. You can buy billing. I have a pay-as-you-go plan that's a little bit different than that. In the course of the class, you're never going to use more than a couple of cents worth of API costs. But you do need to enter it in order to use the API in an ongoing way. So if you get that message that says you've exceeded your quota, this is what you need to do and where you need to do it. And you're able to track your usage and your billing in here. Lots of different ways to prevent yourself from accidentally going bankrupt because your app went viral. The last thing that we'll do is look at where our API key is. If you go up to your account, you'll see View API Keys, and you'll see in here it has this big list. You won't have this many because you might not have any because this is from us creating a bunch of different apps for different things. And so what you want to do is come in and create a new secret key. Now, yeah, I'm going to name this throwaway. We're going to create it. Now, you should never show your API key to anyone ever. So do not, for instance, create a video in which you display it to a class of people. But I'm just going to throw this away right after. You're not going to be able to view this again. For OpenAI, they only show it to you once. You need to copy this somewhere very safe, somewhere, for instance, in an offline note-taking place or in a password keeper is the most ideal. And then hit done. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And then, so you need to be very careful with the API keys because this is the equivalent of your username and password that you can embed into other apps. So anyone with your API key has access essentially to your credit card and is able to spend your money on OpenAI services. So you need to be careful with it. So that is the OpenAI playground. Hope that this has been helpful. A little bit slower and more detailed introduction of what's going on here. We'll keep reiterating back on a lot of these concepts throughout the next couple of weeks. The OpenAI playground is only a place that you can work with OpenAI models. There are similar things that exist for other types of this, particularly for the open source models, because as we've discussed, closed source models usually have one API to choose from, whereas open source models often have many hosted APIs to choose from as a result of being open for anyone to download and use, including to offer a paid API. Thanks. Reach out anytime if you have additional questions or want additional feedback on anything, and see you in the future. Cheers.